Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Blackie in Liverpool for our celebration of public transport policy. This is Bus Regulation, the musical. Hold on to your seats. Over the next 30 minutes, you'll be taken on a whistle-stop tour of more than 60 years of history. We'll see how key political decisions have affected the quality of our public transport and how the quality of our public transport ultimately affects the quality of all our lives. Please welcome your host for this afternoon, Betty, the long-suffering bus passenger.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Betty and I've been travelling around the buses in Merseyside since the 1950s. You won't believe the change I've seen since then, honest to God. We used to have an amazing variety of public transport across our region. Ferries and trains of course, but also trolley buses and talents. An overhead railway station with a spectacular view linking Seaforth to Dingle across the docks. And then at the centre of it all was our world-class tram network, covering all corners of the city and reaching out as far as Aintree, Kirkby, Prescott and Garston. But some misguided politicians decided to rip all that up. Boo! They thought cars and roads were the future, but I always knew that was a mistake. In the absence of our beautiful trams, it was buses that stepped up to fill the gaps. Please welcome to the floor, everyone, Merseyside buses! Woo! In the 60s, most buses in our towns and cities were run by municipal bus companies, owned by our local authorities, or corporations as we called them back then. The biggest was Liverpool Corporation Transport, with more than 1,000 buses reaching out as far as Knowsley and Sefton. Then there was St Helens and Southport. And over the Wirral we had Birkenhead and Wallasey. Then the buses in more rural areas were run by the old private bus companies. In the north we had Ribble Preston, and in the south we had Crossville of Chester. Each bus company had its own patch with its own routes, timetables and fares. It was a system that worked well when most people lived and worked locally. But after the Second World War, all over Britain there'd been a policy of deliberate urban sprawl. Lots of our inner city housing was demolished and thousands of us lot were moved out to new estates on the outskirts, like Kirkby, Canny Farm, Highton and Speke. And some were moved even further away to new towns in Skem and Runcorn. But all that meant was more travelling, with thousands of us now having to commute in and out of the city every day. Merseyside had become a sprawling conurbation and we needed a public transport network to match. That meant planning and coordinating transport across the whole of the region to provide a joined up service so everyone could get around easily without a car. Labour's 1968 Transport Act aimed to deliver this. First, it created the National Bus Company, bringing all our rural bus companies like Crossville and Ribble back into public ownership, so they could cooperate rather than compete. And then, for our big metropolitan areas, the Transport Act created the power to set up passenger transport executives, whose task it would be to provide a properly integrated and efficient system of public passenger transport to meet the needs of each area. Our new designated area of Merseyside would cover some 230 square miles, home to nearly 1.5 million people. And it would bring together Liverpool with Birkenhead and Wallasey. On the 1st of December 1969, the Merseyside Passenger Transport Executive was formed. Or MPTE for short. It inherited all of Liverpool Corporation's buses, which became its North and South divisions, as well as Birkenheads and Wallaceys, which became its Wirral division. Each now proudly displayed the new Catherine Wheel logo. MPT's aim is to unite our region all across the Mersey by expanding and improving public transport connections and coordinating and integrating routes, timetables and fares. It launched a new Cross River Express bus service linking Wallasey to Liverpool when the new Kingsway Tunnel opened in 1971. Then it began collaborating with British Rail. Our region's rail network was renamed Merseyrail, and work began on ambitious plans to transform it all into an electric underground network, with new tunnels under the city to loop and link with our existing trains and stations. MPTE could now plan and coordinate its bus routes to feed into and complement the railways rather than compete. It also had a duty to cooperate with the National Bus Company. And so the PTE made an agreement with Crossville and Ribble so that all their services in Merseyside were run to the PTE's timetables and fares. This made it possible to launch new traveller tickets, the first ticket of that kind in our country, offering unlimited travel on all buses, trains and ferries throughout the PTE's entire area for just £1.95 a week. It was just so easy for us bus passengers. It was boss. But I wanted Talent and Southport to join in on the fun. What we needed was a new regional council to bring everybody together. Then in 1974, the Merseyside County Council was established. It brought together the region's 5 local network authorities who now had a statutory duty to provide a coordinated and efficient system of public passenger transport to meet the needs of our county. Our new council took control of the PTE and renamed it Merseyside Transport. Talents and Southport's bus operations were finally added to the fleet. And all 1,600 buses were united with a beautiful coat of Verona green. Now public transport could be coordinated seamlessly across the entirety of Merseyside, with new interchanges opening at Kirkby and Waterloo, making it easier to hop from the train to the bus. And after the new Loop and Link rail lines were opened in 1977, Merseyside finally had a real metropolitan transport network. Now we just needed a plan to get everyone using it. The early 1980s were an exciting time for us bus passengers. Merseyside Transport decided to reintroduce a bit of local variety by giving colour-coded logos to each of its 5 divisions: North, South, Wirral, Southport and St Helens. Don't they look gorgeous? But the fun really started when Labour took control of the county council in 1981. With their new cheap fares policy inspired what they'd already been doing in South Yorkshire. The aim was to get people out on the buses to revitalise our shopping centres. To help the unemployed and combat that sense of isolation felt by people living on the outskirts. They introduced Save Away tickets, a new daily travel card to give you cheap travel all day long by bus, train and ferry. And they cut fares by 10% every October for the next 4 years. Yes. Offering 2p flat fares for kids and free travel for the unemployed. They ran special 10p Go Out Anywhere days every summer, where you could get to the beach in Southport or over the Wirral for just 10p. That's about 30p in today's money. Bus passenger numbers had soared. Everyone was happy. Finally, Merseyside had a public transport network we could all be proud of. But sadly, it wasn't gonna last. Not for long.
The Conservatives saw people who travelled by bus as failures in life. They were opposed to the public ownership and control of all services and infrastructure. They saw no benefits in coordination and integration, and they saw great dangers in public subsidy. Their aim was to centralise power in Westminster. So they abolished the Merseyside County Council in 1986. Their vision for public transport wouldn't require any strategic planning anyway. They thought the invisible hand of the market could do that work. Their 1985 Transport Act would deregulate bus operations everywhere in Britain except London. The aim was to shake up public transport by injecting some competition. In preparation for deregulation, the National Bus Company was restructured and rebranded. Ribble Services in Merseyside was split off to form a new company called North Western, based in Bootle. And Crossville was also split in two, with its Merseyside operations getting a new Leaping Links logo. They both had bright new liveries in the hope of attracting new business. The Transport Act demanded that all Britain's publicly owned bus operators be transferred into arm's-length public companies. So in 1986, Merseyside Transport became Merseyside Transport Limited, trading as Mersey-Bus. Its public subsidy was removed. It closed several of its garages and made many staff redundant. Now, it was gonna have to fight to survive.
October 1986 was the day when deregulation came into full effect. Merseybus and North Western Crossville went head to head, pulling buses into the city centre to make the most of lucrative routes. Now anyone could start a bus company and run routes wherever they thought they could make the most money. So there were loads of newcomers like Fairway of Kirby, Liverline of Bootle, and Liverbus of Huyton. They were all companies started by drivers that had been made redundant by Merseybus. They were joined by some old coach companies too, like CMT of Wirral, who've been given a new lease of life by deregulation. Dirty tactics were rife, with operators blocking bus stops or running just in front of the others to pick up passengers first. Many unprofitable routes were cut and fares shot up, with some of them more than doubling. Routes, timetables and tickets were changed, and so often it was almost impossible for us bus passengers to keep up. The result was chaos. Integration had become disintegration. So the Tories took the chance to push through their plans for privatisation. Boo! The old NBC companies were the first for the chop. North Western was sold to Draw Lane, a company from Salisbury seen as one of the initial success stories of deregulation. A year later, Crossrail was also brought out by Draw Lane, with half of its services being absorbed into North Western, and its Chester and Wirral services being sold to Potteries Motor Traction of Stoke, known as PMT for short. Mergers and takeovers were about to become the new normal. If you thought the 80s were chaotic, things were about to go from bad to worse. We still had a transport authority, now called Mersey Travel, but it wasn't much of an authority anymore. It could no longer really plan and coordinate bus services to meet our community's needs. Instead, Merseyside had become one of the most hotly contested bus markets in the UK, with more than 58 bus companies now fighting for business on our streets. They had their own routes, timetables and tickets. It was just so confusing for anyone trying to catch a bus. No wonder a third of bus passengers had just given up. Many forced to buy cars they couldn't afford. Merseybus was really struggling, so it had to reinvent itself in order to survive. It introduced a new Crimson Lake livery and set up a low-cost brand called Mersey Rider to take on the competition. Mersey Rider was just the same as Merseybus, except that it paid its drivers less money. These were desperate tactics, meaning that the writing was on the wall. And in 1993, after more than 80 years in public ownership, all Merseybus's operations were sold to its management and its employees for just £1, becoming MTL Trust Holdings Limited, or MTL for short. In a deregulated market, it was grow or die. So MTL expanded way beyond Manchester, running buses across Lancashire and Manchester, and also down in that London. They even took over train services on Merseyrail and Northern after rail privatisation. Then MTL started picking off the local competition. First, they bought up Fairway, but North Western wanted in on the action as well. They bought up Liverline, becoming part of Draw Lane's growing empire, which has since been renamed British Bus plc because they own so many companies across the country. It was no surprise when MTL's Mersey Rider operation was shut down, after its workers went on strike. So they decided to introduce some local brands to take on the remaining competition. Lancashire Travel, Southport and District, and Wirral Peninsula. They were all part of MTL's growing empire, which then took over Little Liverbus as well. competition was exhausting for everyone involved. So in 1995, MTL, Northwestern, CMT and others decided to make an agreement not to encroach on each other's routes and to fix fares. They could all relax, but only for a minute. Didn't they know this new cooperation was outlawed in this new free market regime? The Monopolies and Mergers Commission declared their agreement illegal and fined all the companies owned. So then takeovers resumed. Over on the Wirral, PMT was bought up by First of Aberdeen, which was fast becoming the UK's biggest bus company. Then in 1996, Northwestern's owners, British Bus plc, were bought out by the Cowie Group of Sunderland, becoming the UK's second largest bus company with all its operations rebranded Arriva. Slick corporate identities now seem the way to go. So in 1998, MTL rebranded all its operations in the north of England, MTL North. But it might have looked a bit smarter, it was still headed for trouble. I remember back in 1985, the Tories had claimed deregulation would bring lower fares, new services and more passengers by increasing competition. But the opposite had been proved true. Fares had almost tripled and we'd lost so many vital routes. And passenger numbers were in steep decline. The system was pushing people into poverty and it was a disaster for our climate. And there were now just a few big companies left running most of our buses. MTL North was still struggling. It had overstretched itself trying to run 2 rail franchises as well as buses all over the country. It was becoming financially unstable. Arriva saw an opportunity to pounce and get itself a near monopoly on all public transport in Merseyside. So in February 2000, it made an offer to take over all of MTL's rails and buses. The sale was about to go through, but the Competition Commission intervened. They demanded that a third of MTL's Merseyside operations be sold off to a separate company, bought by 2 former MTL managers that named it Glendale Transport Limited, or GTL for short. To stand any chance against Arriva, GTL had to grow. So it bought out CMT to become the second biggest operator on Merseyside. But its success was short-lived. In 2005, the UK's third biggest bus company, Stagecoach of Perth, swooped in and took over all of GTL. Now, the ownership and control of our buses have never been further from our hands. By now, it was clear that the big bus businesses ruled the show. Arriva, Stagecoach and First are all now multinational companies listed on the stock exchange with one priority: making profit for the shareholders. And in 2010, Arriva's main shareholder became German government when its state-owned rail company, Deutsche Bahn, bought it out for 1.8 billion. And First sold up to its arch rival, Stagecoach, leaving just 2 big companies holding us to ransom. continued to crank up the fares and cut all routes that they didn't consider commercially viable, whilst also receiving millions of pounds in public subsidy directly from the government. The situation was mad. 30 years of deregulation had been a race to the bottom. And from my experience as a long-suffering bus passenger, it was obvious what needed to be done. We needed a new regional authority like our old county council, which could stand up for our communities and ensure that we all got reliable and affordable bus services that we need. Then in 2014, the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority was established, reuniting the old Merseyside county together with Halton. And it took control of our transport authority, Merseytravel, with our new Metro Mayor given new powers to regulate our buses. The question now is, will these powers be put to good use? Last year, our combined authority released its plans to re-regulate all the buses in the Liverpool City region. As part of a new fully integrated public transport network designed to serve our community's needs. Yes. Where our buses, trains and ferries are once again planned and coordinated to work together seamlessly as a whole. So that no matter where you live in our region, you can get around easily without needing to own a car. We can have regular and reliable bus services all times of the day, night and weekends. And we can finally roll out our tap and go tickets so that you can hop from the bus to the train to the ferry. Confident that you'll only pay up to a fair daily price cap. Something that London has had since 2003. Deregulation has left the rest of Britain decades behind. Now it's time to catch up. Let's get behind these plans and make sure our combined authority finally delivers. A public transport network we can all be proud of again.
Thank you for watching Bus Regulation, the musical, created by me, Ellie Harrison, in collaboration with the Better Buses for Merseyside campaign, featuring music by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and starring Betty Beehive as the bus passenger, with skaters from Liverpool Rollerbirds, Amelia Boner, Faye Waring, Christine Higgins, Hannah Dickman, Shelley Salmon, Elle Jackson, Ellis Hogarth and Paulette Barley, and from Wirral Roller Derby, Rebecca Farmer and Rachel Malinois. Our stage hands were Emily Furno and Ellie Harrison. It was produced by Emily Furno and supported by the Arts Council England, the Blackie Foundation for Integrated Transport, Unison Northwest, We Own It, and the Merseyside Pensioners Association. If you do one thing when you leave today, please join the Better Buses for Merseyside campaign, complete the consultation, and let's make sure they deliver the world-class public transport we deserve.